The moment David Chin lifted his daughter's sleeve, every guard in the visitation room stopped moving. What he saw etched into her 10-year-old skin wasn't just abuse. It was a message from the dead. And it would unravel a conspiracy that reached far beyond those prison walls. Stay until the end, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice. For years, 1,460 days since David had held his daughter Emma in his arms. The visiting room at Blackwater Correctional smelled like industrial bleach, trying desperately to mask the scent of broken dreams and lost time. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like mechanical insects, casting harsh shadows across plastic tables bolted to concrete floors. David's hands trembled as he waited at table 12. He'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in his cell. What he'd say, how he'd smile, the way he'd make Emma laugh like he used to before the accident, before the wrongful conviction, before everything fell apart. The metal door screeched open, and there she was. But this wasn't the 6-year-old girl who used to climb on his shoulders and call him her superhero. This Emma moved differently. Her steps were calculated, measured, like someone perpetually preparing for an attack. Her dark hair hung limp around a face that had learned to hide too much too soon. The social worker beside her, Ms. Patricia Walsh, wore the expression of someone who'd stopped seeing children as people and started seeing them as case files decades ago. Her clipboard might as well have been surgically attached to her hand. 30 minutes, Mr. Chin, Walsh announced with bureaucratic precision. Physical contact limited to greeting and farewell. All conversation is monitored. David barely heard her. His eyes were locked on Emma, searching for remnants of the little girl who used to dance in the kitchen while he made breakfast. Who used to demand he read the same bedtime story 7 times in a row. Who used to believe her daddy could fix anything. "Hey, Butterfly," David whispered, using his old nickname for her. His voice cracked on the second word. Emma's eyes flickered with recognition, a ghost of the child she'd been. But she didn't smile. She didn't run to him. She just stood there, arms wrapped protectively around her middle, wearing an oversized hoodie in the middle of summer. That's when David noticed it. The way she held her arms. The careful positioning. The deliberate concealment. Something was wrong. Emma finally sat down across from him, moving like someone much older than 10. The silence between them felt alive, dangerous, full of things neither of them knew how to say. "You've grown so tall," David tried again, forcing brightness into his voice. "How's school? Are you still the best at math like you used to be?" A shadow of pain crossed Emma's face. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm okay at it." Her voice was different too. Smaller, like someone had taken scissors to her confidence and cut out all the bright pieces. David leaned forward, desperately searching for connection. "Remember how we used to solve those puzzles together? The really hard ones with..." That's when it happened. Emma reached for the small paper cup of water Ms. Walsh had placed on the table. As her arm extended, the sleeve of her hoodie slid back. And David's entire world stopped. Carved into his daughter's skin, still raw and angry, were symbols he recognized instantly. Ancient protective marks. The same ones his grandmother used to draw in the margins of old letters. The same ones his wife had tattooed on her wrist before she died in that car crash 4 years ago. But there was more. Letters. Carved with precision that spoke of deliberate torture. The room tilted. David's vision tunneled until there was nothing but his daughter's mutilated arm and the desperate message someone had forced her to bear on her own skin. "Emma." His voice came out strangled. "Baby, what happened to your arm?" Emma's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She yanked her sleeve down with practiced efficiency, her eyes darting to Ms. Walsh with the kind of fear David had only seen in witnesses to violence. Her whole body went rigid, preparing for something David couldn't understand. "I fell," Emma whispered. The lie was so rehearsed it had become smooth, polished by repetition. "I fall a lot now." But David had spent 4 years in prison learning to read people, learning to see the truth behind careful lies. He'd grown up in neighborhoods where children learned to hide their bruises, where monsters wore respectable faces and abuse hid behind closed doors. He knew what he was seeing. Ms. Walsh was scribbling notes on her clipboard, apparently oblivious to the exchange that had just shattered David's world. Another visit, another checkbox, another day of institutional blindness that allowed children to suffer while bureaucrats shuffled papers. "Tell me about where you're living," David said, fighting to keep his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest like a gathering storm. "You like your foster family?" The question landed like a grenade. Emma's face drained of color. Her breathing quickened. Her eyes filled with tears she'd clearly been trained not to shed. "The Blackwoods they're fine," she whispered, but her voice betrayed everything the words tried to hide. "The Blackwoods." David memorized the name, filing it away with the image of those carved symbols, the deliberate message, the evidence of systematic torture on his 10-year-old daughter's skin. But there was something else bothering him. Something about those symbols that didn't just speak of abuse. They spoke of something darker, older, more deliberate than simple cruelty. Those weren't random markings. They were ritual scars. The same kind his grandmother had warned him about before she died, speaking in hushed tones about old practices that should have died generations ago. About families who believed children's pain could feed ancient powers. About sacrifices disguised as accidents. About his wife's death that was never properly investigated. "Emma," David said quietly, forcing his daughter to meet his eyes. "Did the Blackwoods, did they do this to you?" The terror that flooded Emma's face answered before her words could lie. "Time's up," Ms. Walsh announced with zero awareness of the crisis unfolding in front of her. "Say goodbye, Emma." "No, wait." David started to protest, but two guards were already moving toward the table. Emma stood mechanically, a small soldier following orders she'd learned to obey without question. As David rose for the permitted farewell embrace, he pulled his daughter close and whispered directly into her ear. "I'm getting out in 2 weeks, Butterfly. 2 weeks, and then I'm coming for you. I'm going to fix this. I promise." Emma's entire body shuddered against him. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, and David saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't hope he saw there. It was warning. "Daddy," Emma whispered so quietly he almost missed it. "They know about you. They've been waiting for you. Please don't." "Emma, let's go," Ms. Walsh interrupted sharply, already pulling his daughter away. As Emma was led back through the metal door, she looked over her shoulder one last time. Her lips moved, forming words David had to read rather than hear. "She's not dead." The door slammed shut. David stood frozen at table 12 while the visiting room emptied around him. His mind was racing, trying to process what Emma had just told him. She's not dead. His wife who died in a car accident 4 years ago. His wife whose death had been ruled accidental despite all the inconsistencies. His wife whose funeral he'd watched from prison through a video feed because they wouldn't let him attend in person. The wife whose body had been cremated so quickly the family barely had time to say goodbye. She's not dead. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The wrongful conviction that had been too neat, too perfect. The evidence that appeared out of nowhere. The witnesses who recanted their testimonies after his sentencing. The car accident that investigators barely looked into. The foster placement that put Emma with a family whose name he'd never heard before despite having lived in this community his entire life. This wasn't random. This was planned. "Chen, let's go." The guard's voice cut through his thoughts. "Back to your block." As David walked through the corridors back to his cell, his mind was already 3 steps ahead. 2 weeks until release. 2 weeks to figure out who the Blackwoods really were. 2 weeks to discover why his daughter was being held by people who carved ancient symbols into her skin. 2 weeks to find out if his wife was really alive, and if so, why she'd let their daughter suffer for 4 years. His cellmate, Marcus Rivera, looked up from his book when David entered. Marcus had been inside for 6 years on a weapons charge, but he'd become something of a prison scholar, reading everything he could get his hands on. More importantly, Marcus had connections on the outside that most inmates would kill for. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Hermano," Marcus observed. "Visit didn't go well?" David sat heavily on his bunk, his hands still shaking. "Marcus, you still have those contacts? The ones who can find information that's supposed to stay buried." Marcus's expression shifted from casual to serious. "Depends on what you need. Everything you can find on a family called the Blackwoods. Foster parents. And..." David paused, barely believing what he was about to ask. "I need you to pull records on my wife's death. Medical examiner reports, cremation certificates, everything. Your wife's dead, man. I was here when you got the news." "Maybe," David said quietly, "or maybe that's what someone wanted everyone to believe." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "This is going to cost favors I've been saving for years. I'll owe you whatever you want. You're getting out in 2 weeks, Hermano. You're about to be free. You sure you want to burn bridges before you even cross them?" David thought about the scars on Emma's arms, about the terror in her eyes, about the message carved into her skin that spoke of desperation and torture, about his daughter's whispered warning that someone knew he was coming. "My daughter's being held by people who are carving marks into her skin," David said flatly. "Marks that match symbols my grandmother used to warn me about. Ritual marks. And she just told me my dead wife might be alive. So yeah, I'm sure." Marcus closed his book with a decisive snap. "All right, give me 48 hours." David spent the next 2 days in a state of carefully controlled chaos. On the surface, he maintained the routine that had governed his life for 4 years. Wake up, count, breakfast, work detail, count, dinner, recreation, count, lights out. The mechanical precision of prison life that had once driven him crazy now provided perfect cover for the storm raging beneath his calm exterior. But every spare moment was spent in the prison library, hunched over the ancient computers that provided limited internet access. He searched for everything he could find about the Blackwoods, about foster care in his county, about patterns of abuse that matched what he'd seen on Emma's arms. What he found made his blood run cold. The Blackwoods had been foster parents for 7 years. During that time, they'd housed 14 different children. 14 kids who'd all been moved to different placements within 8 to 12 months, every single one of them described in official reports as behaviorally challenging or unsuitable for the Blackwood home environment. 14 children. 14 chances for someone to notice a pattern. 14 failures of a system that was supposed to protect the most vulnerable. But it was what David found in old newspaper archives that made everything click into a nightmare pattern. 3 years ago, a child in Blackwood care had died. 10-year-old Sarah Mendoza, officially ruled as an accident. She'd fallen down the basement stairs and broken her neck. The investigation had been cursory at best. The Blackwoods had been cleared of any wrongdoing. The case had been closed within a week. David pulled up Sarah's obituary photo and felt his heart stop. She looked exactly like Emma. Same dark hair, same delicate features, same age. They could have been sisters. That wasn't coincidence. David's fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for more information about Sarah Mendoza. What he found sent ice through his veins. Sarah's mother had also died in a car accident 2 months before Sarah entered foster care. Just like Emma. Just like the pattern that had destroyed David's family. Chin. The librarian's voice cut through his concentration. "You've got a phone call. Legal consultation." David's pulse quickened. Marcus had said 48 hours. This was it. The phone bank was relatively empty during the afternoon work period. David grabbed the receiver with hands that only shook slightly, keeping his voice neutral in case guards were monitoring. "Yeah, David, it's Marcus's contact on the outside." The voice belonged to a woman, professional and clipped. "My name's irrelevant. What matters is what I found. Tell me." The Blackwoods aren't who they claim to be. Robert Blackwood doesn't exist before 2016. Patricia Blackwood died in 1993. The woman using that name now stole a dead child's identity. They've been operating under false identities for at least 7 years, possibly longer. David gripped the phone tighter. And my wife. The pause on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats too long. David, your wife's cremation certificate was forged. The funeral home that allegedly handled her remains doesn't have any record of her. The death certificate was filed, but the medical examiner who signed it retired and moved to Mexico 2 weeks after your wife's supposed death. I tracked him down. For the right price, he admitted he never actually examined a body. The room spun. David forced himself to breathe, to think, to process information that should have been impossible. Where is she? I don't know. But David, there's more. Your wife's family, her grandmother specifically, came from a community with documented ties to ritual practices. Old-world stuff that most people dismiss as superstition. But there are records of disappearances, of children who were taken for ceremonies, of families who believed bloodlines carried power that could be transferred through specific rituals. The symbols on Emma's arms suddenly made horrifying sense. My grandmother used to draw those same symbols, David said quietly. She said they were protection marks against people who believed in blood magic. Then your grandmother knew what she was protecting you from. David, the Blackwoods aren't just abusive foster parents. They're part of something much bigger. The children they take all fit a specific profile. Certain age, certain physical characteristics, children who've lost mothers in convenient accidents. They're not random placements. They're selected. Selected for what? I think you already know. David did. The horrifying pieces were clicking together into a picture that shouldn't exist in the modern world. But the evidence was undeniable. His daughter wasn't just being abused. She was being prepared for something ancient, something dark, something that required bloodlines and rituals and sacrifices disguised as accidents. I'm getting out in 12 days, David said, his voice hard as steel. I need you to find out everything you can about where they're keeping Emma, where they gather, what they're planning. And I need you to find my wife. David, if she's alive and part of this, then I need to know that too. I need to know if my wife is victim or monster. Because either way, I'm bringing my daughter home. The line went dead. David stood in the phone alcove, surrounded by the familiar sounds of prison life, but feeling completely separate from it. He'd spent 4 years believing he was serving time for a crime he didn't commit. Now he understood that his imprisonment had been deliberate. Someone had needed him out of the way, unable to protect his daughter, while they prepared her for something that required her father's absence. They'd created a perfect cage. Not just the physical bars that surrounded him, but the legal ones. The conviction that meant even after release, he'd be a felon with limited rights, limited credibility, limited ability to protect his child through official channels. They'd planned for everything. Everything except a father's fury. Marcus found David in the recreation yard that evening, shooting baskets with mechanical precision that spoke of someone whose body was present but whose mind was elsewhere. Got something for you, hermano, Marcus said quietly, positioning himself so their conversation wouldn't carry to the guards stationed at the corners. My contact pulled some strings, called in favors that are going to cost me. But what she found? He shook his head. This is bigger than we thought. David caught the basketball, held it, turned to face his friend. Tell me. The Blackwoods are part of a network. At least 7 other families operating across 3 states, all using stolen identities, all working as foster parents. The children they place with these families all fit specific criteria, age between 8 and 12, physical characteristics that match certain bloodlines, mothers who died in accidents that were never properly investigated. How many kids? In the last decade? At least 40 that we can confirm. But here's where it gets worse. Sarah Mendoza, the girl who died in Blackwood Care 3 years ago? She wasn't the first. 2 other children died in similar accidents while placed with families in this network. All ruled accidental. All investigations closed quickly. All families cleared of wrongdoing. David's hands clenched around the basketball hard enough to make the leather groan. Someone's protecting them. Multiple someones. We're talking about people in law enforcement, social services, medical examiners' offices. This isn't just a conspiracy, David. It's an institution. They've built an entire infrastructure designed to identify, acquire, and prepare specific children for whatever they're doing. Ritual sacrifice, David said flatly. My wife's family practiced old traditions. Blood magic. Ceremonies that required specific lineages and specific ages. Marcus's expression darkened. Your contact mention anything about timing? Specific dates when these accidents happened? David shook his head, but something cold was forming in his gut. Why? Because Sarah Mendoza died on the autumn equinox. The other 2 children? Spring equinox and winter solstice. These aren't random accidents, Hermano. These are scheduled murders. The basketball dropped from David's hands, bouncing across the concrete yard unnoticed. When's the next equinox? 13 days. Right after your release date. The timing wasn't coincidence. They'd planned for David to be released, to be free but still constrained by his felon status, unable to officially intervene while they completed whatever ritual required Emma's blood. They're going to kill my daughter, David said quietly, the words carrying absolute certainty. On the equinox, they're going to kill her and make it look like an accident, just like all the others. Then we have 13 days to stop them. David looked at his friend. Marcus, you've got 2 years left on your sentence. You've stayed clean, kept your head down. You're planning to get out and rebuild your life. This isn't your fight. Marcus met his gaze steadily. I've got a daughter too, remember? 8 years old. Haven't seen her in 6 years. And every night I lie awake terrified that she's suffering somewhere and I can't help her because I'm trapped in here. So yeah, it's my fight. Because tomorrow it could be my kid some sick bastards are carving symbols into. David felt something loosening in his chest. He'd been preparing to fight this battle alone, to burn every bridge and sacrifice every future possibility to save Emma. But having an ally, someone who understood the stakes and was willing to risk everything, changed the tactical landscape entirely. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. I need you to coordinate information while I'm on the outside. You've got contacts I don't have anymore, resources that will take me weeks to rebuild. I need you to be my nerve center, my intel hub, my backup plan if things go wrong. Done. What else? I need you to find out where they're keeping my wife. Because Emma said she's alive, and if she's alive, she knows everything about this network, about what they're planning, about how to stop them. And if she's not a victim? If she's part of this? David's face hardened into something that made Marcus step back involuntarily. Then she's going to tell me everything anyway, one way or another. Over the next 3 days, information flooded in through channels that officially didn't exist. Marcus's network of contacts, people who owed favors, people who believed in justice over law, people who had their own reasons for wanting to expose the conspiracy, worked around the clock to build a complete picture of what David was up against. The Blackwoods lived in a large farmhouse 20 miles outside the city, isolated by acres of private property that ensured no neighbors would hear children screaming. The property had a basement that didn't appear on any official floor plans, suggesting modifications made specifically for whatever rituals they conducted. Surveillance revealed that Patricia Blackwood left the house every morning at 7 to work her day job as a school counselor, a position that gave her perfect access to identify potential victims. Robert Blackwood worked from home, managing the day-to-day care of the foster children currently in their custody. Currently, 3 children lived in the Blackwood house. Emma, a 9-year-old boy named Carlos, and an 11-year-old girl named May. All 3 fit the profile of previous victims. All three had mothers who died in suspicious accidents within the past year. All three had exactly 13 days left to live if David didn't succeed. But it was what they discovered about David's wife that shattered any remaining hope for a simple resolution. Jennifer Chen, David's supposedly dead wife, was alive and living under the name Rebecca Thornton in a small town 30 miles from the Blackwood property. She worked as a researcher at a private historical society, specializing in genealogical records and ancient cultural practices. She was also photographed attending gatherings at the Blackwood property, gatherings that occurred on solstices and equinoxes, gatherings that involved people wearing ceremonial robes and conducting rituals in that hidden basement. She wasn't a victim. She was a participant. Marcus delivered this news to David in the prison library, watching his friend's face carefully as the implications sank in. "Maybe she's being coerced," Marcus offered, though his voice carried no conviction. "Maybe they're forcing her to participate." David stared at the surveillance photo of his wife, alive and healthy and smiling as she entered the Blackwood property carrying what looked like ritual supplies. The woman he'd loved for 12 years. The woman whose death had destroyed him. The woman who'd given birth to the daughter they were now torturing. "She faked her death to get away from me," David said quietly. "She faked her death so I couldn't stop her from involving Emma in this. The car accident, the convenient evidence that got me convicted, my imprisonment right before Emma turned 6, it was all planned. She needed me gone so she could offer our daughter to whatever dark thing these people worship." "David, she's not being coerced, Marcus. She's the architect. My grandmother warned me about her family, about their beliefs, about practices that should have died centuries ago. I thought it was just old woman superstition. I thought Jennifer had left all that behind when she married me. I was wrong." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could. But David forced himself to focus on what mattered. His feelings about his wife's deception were irrelevant. Emma's survival was everything. "I need a location," David said flatly. "Where Jennifer's living, where she works, her daily routine. And I need to know exactly who else is part of this network. Names, addresses, positions. Everyone involved in stealing and killing children." "David, what are you planning to do?" "Whatever it takes to save my daughter and stop these monsters from hurting anyone else." "That sounds like you're planning something that could put you back in prison permanently. Or worse." David met his friend's gaze with eyes that had gone cold and distant. "I've been preparing for 4 years, Marcus. Learning, training, becoming someone who can do what needs to be done. Prison either breaks you or makes you into something harder. Something capable of crossing lines that normal fathers can't cross." "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about stopping people who've been murdering children for years while hiding behind respectability and legal protection. I'm talking about justice that the system refuses to deliver because the system is corrupted from the inside. And yes, if that requires me to do things that send me back to prison for life, then that's a price I'll pay. Because Emma is 10 years old and has 13 days before they kill her as part of some ancient ritual that shouldn't exist in the modern world." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with his own conscience and the knowledge that he was helping a man plan actions that crossed every legal and moral boundary society had established. "There's a weapons dealer I know," Marcus finally said. "Operates out of a pawn shop 2 blocks from the prison. Tell him I sent you. He'll set you up with whatever you need, no questions, no records." "I thought you said this wasn't your fight." "It is my fight. Because if you fail, more kids die. And if you succeed but get caught, someone needs to continue exposing this network. I can do that from in here. I've got contacts, resources, credibility with people who matter. If you go down, I'll make sure the whole conspiracy comes crashing down with you." David felt something that might have been hope flickering in the darkness that had consumed him since seeing Emma's mutilated arms. He wasn't alone in this fight. Even if he fell, even if the Blackwoods killed him before he could save Emma, Marcus would ensure that someone exposed the truth. 8 more days, David said. 8 days until I walk out of here. And then the Blackwoods and everyone in their network are going to learn what happens when you hurt the wrong man's daughter. David Shin walked through the prison gates at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, carrying everything he owned in a small paper bag. The clothes on his back were the same ones he'd worn into Blackwater 4 years ago, now hanging loose on a body that prison had transformed into something leaner, harder, more dangerous. The world outside the prison walls felt alien. Too much space, too many sounds, colors that seemed impossibly bright after years of institutional gray. For a moment, David stood frozen on the sidewalk, overwhelmed by the sensory assault of freedom. Then he thought of Emma, trapped in that farmhouse with only days left before the equinox, and his paralysis evaporated. Marcus's contact, the same woman who'd been feeding him information for the past week, was waiting in a nondescript sedan parked across the street. She looked exactly like her voice suggested, professional, mid-40s, the kind of woman who could blend into any environment without attracting attention. "Mr. Chen," she said as he slid into the passenger seat. "I'm Lisa Park. We have 8 days to save your daughter and dismantle a conspiracy that's been operating for decades. Let's not waste time on pleasantries." David liked her immediately. She drove while filling him in on developments that had occurred during his final days inside. The network had intensified surveillance on the Blackwood property. They'd confirmed that preparations were underway for an equinox ceremony. And most critically, they'd identified 12 other families across 3 states who were part of the same organization. "We've also located your wife," Lisa said, her tone carefully neutral. "Jennifer, or Rebecca as she's calling herself now, has been meeting regularly with other members of the network, planning sessions for the upcoming ritual." "Is Emma part of those meetings?" "No. The children are kept separate. But David, we've intercepted communications that suggest Emma isn't the only intended victim. The network is planning something bigger than previous ceremonies. They're talking about a convergence, multiple sacrifices performed simultaneously across different locations." The scale of it staggered David's mind. Not just Emma, but multiple children killed at once as part of some massive ritual. "How many?" "At least 8 children that we can confirm. Maybe more. 8 families about to lose their children. 8 kids like Emma, carved with symbols and prepared for slaughter by people who'd stolen them under the pretense of providing care and safety. We need to hit all the locations simultaneously," David said, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. "If we alert one family, they'll warn the others. We need coordinated action across 3 states. That requires resources we don't have. Law enforcement, FBI, coordinated raids, none of which we can access without evidence that will hold up in court. Everything we have is circumstantial, obtained through questionable means, or inadmissible because of how we acquired it. Then we don't go through official channels." Lisa glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "What are you suggesting? You said you have contacts. People who believe in justice over law. People who have their own reasons for wanting to stop this network. I'm suggesting we build our own task force. 8 targets, 8 teams, simultaneous operations on the equinox. That's vigilante justice, Mr. Chin. People could die. We could all end up in prison. People are already dying. Children are already dying. The system has had decades to stop this and failed repeatedly because the system is compromised. So yes, I'm suggesting vigilante justice. I'm suggesting we do what needs to be done because no one else will." Lisa drove in silence for several blocks, and David could see the war playing out behind her eyes. She was law-abiding by nature, someone who believed in institutions and processes. But she'd also spent weeks investigating a conspiracy that revealed how thoroughly those institutions had been corrupted. "I'll make some calls," she finally said. "No promises. But there are people who might be willing to help. Veterans who've seen what corruption does to innocent people. Parents who've lost children to a system that failed them. People who have skills and motivation but need direction." "How long?" 2 days. Maybe 3. I can't guarantee anyone will agree to this. Then I'll do it alone if I have to. But Lisa, one way or another, my daughter is coming home. And everyone involved in this conspiracy is going to face consequences for what they've done. Lisa dropped David at a motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about guests who paid cash. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and broken dreams, but it had a bed, a shower, and most importantly, privacy. David's first call was to Marcus, using a burner phone Lisa had provided. "Hermano, you're out," Marcus said, genuine warmth in his voice. "How's it feel?" Terrifying and liberating at the same time. "Listen, we're moving forward with the plan. Lisa's reaching out to potential team members. I need you to coordinate communication once we're operational." "Already set up. I've got secure channels established, information protocols in place, and backup plans for every scenario I could imagine. David, I've also been digging deeper into the network's hierarchy. There's someone above the Blackwoods, someone directing all 8 families. If you want to truly dismantle this thing, you need to cut off the head." "Who?" "Still working on it. But whoever it is has been operating for at least 30 years. They're careful, paranoid, and extremely well protected. Taking them down won't be easy." "Nothing about this is easy. But Marcus, I need a favor that goes beyond information gathering." "Name it." "If I don't make it out of this, if the Blackwoods kill me before I can save Emma, I need you to make sure the whole conspiracy gets exposed. Every name, every location, every crime. Burn it all down and make sure the world knows what these monsters did." "David, promise me, Marcus. Promise me that even if I fail, Emma's suffering won't be meaningless. Promise me that no more children will die because we stayed silent about what we knew." A long pause, heavy with the weight of what David was asking. "I promise, hermano. But you're not going to fail. You're going to save your daughter and come back to tell me how it went over terrible prison coffee when I visit you as a free man." David smiled despite everything. 2 years, Marcus. 2 more years and you're out. And when I get out, you and Emma are coming to my release. We're going to have dinner like normal families and pretend none of this nightmare ever happened. Deal. After hanging up with Marcus, David stood at the window of his motel room, staring out at a world that had continued spinning without him for 4 years. Somewhere in this city, his wife was alive and planning to sacrifice their daughter. Somewhere, 8 other families were preparing to murder children in service of beliefs that belonged in history books, not modern reality. And somewhere, a 10-year-old girl was counting down the days until she died, believing her father couldn't save her because he was locked behind prison walls. But David wasn't locked away anymore. He was free, and he was coming for them all. 3 days before the equinox, David stood outside a modest house in suburban anonymity, watching the woman who used to be his wife through a kitchen window. Jennifer, Rebecca, moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, making coffee, checking her phone, looking exactly like any other professional woman preparing for a day of work. Except this woman had faked her death, destroyed David's life, and delivered their daughter into the hands of monsters who were carving ritual symbols into her skin. Lisa had dropped him off 2 blocks away with strict instructions not to make contact until they had more information. But David hadn't spent 4 years in prison learning patience just to watch from the shadows while Jennifer continued living her comfortable lie. He walked up to the front door and knocked. The woman who answered wore Jennifer's face, but her expression shifted through surprise, shock, fear, and finally resignation in the space of 3 seconds. She tried to close the door, but David's hand shot out, catching it with the reflexes he'd honed through years of prison survival. "Hello, Jennifer," David said quietly. "Or should I call you Rebecca? I'm having trouble keeping track of which name you're using to hide from the family you destroyed." Jennifer's face went pale, but she recovered quickly, stepping back to let him enter. The house was tastefully decorated, comfortable, the home of someone who'd built a new life on the ashes of her old one. "You should be in prison," she said, closing the door behind him. I was released early. Good behavior. David's voice dripped with bitter irony. Seems like a lifetime of taking the blame for crimes I didn't commit finally paid off. Jennifer moved to the kitchen, putting distance and a counter between them. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice remained steady. Why are you here, David? I visited our daughter last week. Did you know that? They gave me 30 minutes with Emma. 30 minutes to see what you and your friends have been doing to her. Something flickered across Jennifer's face. Guilt, maybe, or regret, but it vanished quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. David pulled out his phone, showing her the photo Lisa had taken during surveillance of the Blackwood property. Jennifer in ceremonial robes, entering the farmhouse on the last equinox. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I know about the network. I know about the rituals. I know that you faked your death so you could offer our daughter as a sacrifice to whatever ancient horror your family worships. Jennifer's composure cracked. She sank into a chair, her face in her hands. For a long moment, the only sound was her breathing, ragged and desperate. You don't understand, she finally whispered. You can't understand. Then explain it to me. Explain how a mother carves symbols into her daughter's skin. Explain how you let those monsters torture a 10-year-old child. Explain how you became someone I don't recognize. Jennifer looked up, and David saw something in her eyes that chilled him more than her betrayal. It was a belief. Absolute, unshakable faith in something he couldn't comprehend. My family has carried this responsibility for generations, she said. The ceremonies, the sacrifices, they're not murder, David. They're necessary. They maintain a balance that keeps something far worse from breaking through. You're insane. Am I? Tell me, David, why do you think your grandmother drew those protection symbols? Why do you think she warned you about my family? Because she knew. She understood that there are things older than humanity, things that hunger for our world, and the only thing keeping them at bay are the rituals that people like my family have maintained for centuries. David felt reality tilting, shifting into something that shouldn't exist. You're saying you sacrifice children to prevent some kind of supernatural threat? Not just any children. Specific bloodlines. Specific ages. The rituals require precision, David. And yes, children die. But their deaths save millions who never even know they're in danger. That's not your choice to make. Those are innocent kids, Jennifer. Our daughter is innocent. You can't just decide her life is worth less than your paranoid delusions about ancient evils. Jennifer stood, moving with sudden intensity. It's not paranoia. It's truth passed down through generations. And Emma is special. Her bloodline is powerful. Her sacrifice would strengthen the barriers for decades. Maybe longer. The casual way she discussed murdering their daughter made David's vision go red. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to not give in to the rage that wanted him to hurt her the way she'd hurt Emma. I'm taking Emma away from the Blackwoods, David said flatly, and I'm dismantling your entire network. Every family, every participant, every person who enabled this nightmare. You can either help me, or you can watch it all burn from whatever prison cell I put you in. You can't stop this, David. Even if you rescue Emma, even if you expose us, the ceremonies will continue. There are always more believers, more families willing to do what's necessary. You're one man. We're an institution that's survived for centuries. Then I'll spend the rest of my life tearing down your institution one believer at a time. Starting with you. Jennifer's expression hardened. If you interfere with the equinox ceremony, Emma will die anyway. But her death won't serve any purpose. It will just be murder, David. Meaningless violence that saves no one. No, her death would be murder only if I let it happen. What I'm planning is a rescue. And justice for every child your network has killed. Justice. Jennifer laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You spent 4 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit because we needed you out of the way. You think you understand justice? Justice is whatever the people in power decide it is. And we have more power than you can imagine. David pulled out a second phone, one Jennifer hadn't seen. On its screen was a live stream feed to Marcus back in prison, recording every word of their conversation. You just confessed to framing me for a crime I didn't commit, David said quietly. You just admitted to conspiracy, kidnapping, child abuse, and premeditated murder. And it's all being recorded by a man who has contacts in law enforcement, media, and civil rights organizations. Even if you kill me right now, this conversation goes public. Your network gets exposed, and every participant spends the rest of their lives in prison.